To get the Crime Writers on Aftershow right now, go to patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, she raised millions of dollars to build a machine that could conduct dozens of diagnostic tests from a single drop of blood. But it was all a lie. We'll return to our 2019 review of the biotech-con podcast, The Dropout. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
So, Kevin, what are we going to hear in today's CWO Classic Rewind?
Okay, this was requested by Veronica O'Shea. It goes out to her husband. Okay, I don't know why. It's long distance dedication. At least this wasn't Tiger King.
Maybe
right?
he helped her do a scam, too. No, I doubt it. Sorry, Veronica. I know you didn't do a scam.
Yeah, Veronica wants to hear our February 11th, 2019 discussion of the podcast, The Dropout, from ABC News, which we refer to as a slow burn with a green juice chaser.
Oh, all right.
So, shall we have a listen?
Yeah, let's do it. For our first review of the show, we are talking about The Dropout, the podcast that focuses on the con perpetuated by the founder of a biotech company that made big promises around the business of blood tests.
Please begin.
This is the testimony of Elizabeth Holmes going on the record in San Francisco, California at 9 o'clock.
This is the story of the rise and fall of the world's youngest self-made female billionaire.
Did it concern you that a number of tests weren't working on Theranos' devices?
Look, I know that we made mistakes.
ABC Radio and ABC News Nightline deftly build the story of a massive bio-med tech fraud in The Dropout, and host Rebecca Jarvis paints a surprising portrait of former Theranos founder and self-made billionaire Elizabeth Holmes. Now, there's just a few episodes out of The Dropout, but we will be discussing some plot points. So if you want to stay spoiler-free for The Dropout and just hear our thumbs up or thumbs down review, we will put a note in the show notes about where to go for that. The first thing I want to talk about, Kevin, is this is a podcast made by a TV network.
Mm-hmm. Well, also a radio network.
Yes. But
it's a news organization.
News organization that makes
ABC,
news a different way.
It's ABC Radio.
And?
ABC News Nightline.
Correct. And this is so, but we do even know from radio news, commercial radio news, that the sound is usually very different from what we're used to in narrative podcast audio.
Yeah, have a slightly different sensibility.
That's right.
Yeah.
But this, hallelujah, actually sounds like a podcast made by podcast people, does it not?
It does. Some of it actually kind of sounds like a podcast made by television people, which is not a knock. It sounds very good. I think what I hear is, like when you have like multiple people being interviewed and you're sort of on location, I very much am hearing the audio track of some video.
Right.
And it makes sense if this is ABC News Nightline, that there is probably some video companion to all of this. There's a lot of resources thrown at it, and knowing after having our discussion last week about the synergistic relationship between platforms, that there's probably also, going to be some TV special about this case. But the podcast side,
yeah,
solid.
Yeah, the narrative is great. Mm-hmm. Rebecca Jarvis is a great host. And I just think that part of it, and I just want to say, like, after kind of dissing Bagman, which to me sounds like a poorly mixed version of the Rachel Maddow show, this sounds like a podcast. It made me very happy, and I'm enjoying listening to it on that front. Now, Toby, corporate fraud stories and true crime lovers, do you think the two mix?
In this case, yes.
Why is that?
I guess there's enough sensation to it that I think you can be drawn into it without necessarily being all that interested in that kind of crime. There's big personalities. The con is just ridiculous. It's just so much bigger than life, I'm sure there's going to be a great movie about this someday. I think there's a lot of sort of financial crime things that would not lend themselves to a good podcast, but I think that the cast of characters here and just the brazenness of what she was pulling off, I think, at least for me. I think it's really compelling.
Some of the most interesting stuff, and I think the show just sets it up so well in terms of her image building, her very intentional image building to perpetuate this fraud. The image is very important. But Rebecca Jarvis goes to Stanford, where Elizabeth Holmes went to school and then famously dropped out, following in the footsteps of other famous billionaire entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg.
What was your first meeting with Elizabeth Holmes like?
So Elizabeth was brought to me by a person who'd been the former president of Panasonic, saying to me that she was this brilliant girl and she had this wonderful business idea. The idea was simply that she was going to make a microfluidic patch to sample blood to test for infectious organisms and then deliver antibiotics through the same microfluidic channels. Now, that's not possible because the antibiotics are not potent, and I don't want to go into the details. But I kept saying to her, that doesn't work.
How did she respond to the criticism?
Just kind of blinked her eyes and nodded and left.
Laura, what did you think of these scenes at Stanford? We hear the dean is the one who first tells us that Elizabeth Holmes changed her speaking voice.
Oh, that was my favorite.
Tell me what you think about that setup and sort of hearing about what she used to be like versus what she was like when she became famous.
She was really a master manipulator, in my opinion. And listening to this, it reminded me of, it was like the tech biomedical version of Dirty John or Dr. Death, in terms of that type of person that managed to fool everybody around them. But starting early, it was almost like she was really creating and curating this image of who she was to the people around her. And now looking back, oh my God, when they ever said, and then people who knew her were like, that's not her real voice. I'm like, oh, now every time I hear her voice, I want to scream because it's so fake. Now it sounds so fake.
Right.
Well, yeah, we're one small, no vials of blood here, just one little prick. I'm like, shut up, you freaking fraud. But it was just listening to it, really masterful in terms of the way. And you have to wonder, did she believe what she was setting up, or was she just so out of touch with her own abilities that she really thought this is something she was going to be able to do?
Well, that is kind of a really interesting question. And I think that it's revealing in some of those early Stanford scenes. When she went to college, she asked that dean to be her mentor to whatever. Then she was like, nope, no, I'm not going to do that because you're a kid. And the thing you're talking about won't work. That one professor.
Oh, yeah.
And her solution was
that stuff doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and her solution was to go to a whole different professor so that he would give her what she wants.
I introduced her to a couple of venture capitalists that I felt would sit down and chat with her about her vision and her aspirations.
So how did Elizabeth Holmes convince you to become a director?
Didn't take much convincing. I was very intrigued by her vision and felt it would be a really interesting proposition to be engaged with. She asked me if I would be on her board, and I said yes.
So Channing Robertson, that second professor, Kevin, calls Holmes. He says she's like Da Vinci. And then he puts his money and he joins the board of her company. And then we also kind of hear, this whole idea, all these Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates types, they made it so cool to be a dropout that even academia is now kind of buying into this.
But she poached a lot of folks from, from Apple, and she envisioned the company that she wanted and tried to set that up. The only problem is that the product that they had didn't work, and they did not admit to that, did not try to, I'm sure they tried to improve it and tried to make it work, but they were never honest with investors or the public or their clients like Walgreens that they're getting $1 gazillion from, that this piece of science fiction doesn't work.
She cared very much about what it looked like, though.
She did care what it looked like.
She wanted the UX to be good. The UX for the thing that didn't work. I do want to get back to the voice thing for 1 second because I do think the way, Laura, I think you're right. The particular manner in which she changed her voice, when you hear it and you know she's faking it, is absurd. But women, especially like famous professional women, I mean, it's not uncommon for women to get voice coaching and to work on their voice. One of the most famous people to do so is Oprah Winfrey, who's talked many times about how she's lowered the register of her voice and she's really like dug into like this. I'm doing my like, it's not an Oprah impression, but when she talks about it, she talks about really sinking into but it's not the same as going, so anyway. It's just not the same. It's a whole different kind of thing. It's like a disguise that she's putting on. It's really incredible.
Because it's so fake sounding.
Yes.
When you know it's fake and then you listen to it, you're like, oh my God, how did nobody think this was off?
Let me ask a little bit about you. Do you own a TV?
No.
Why not?
I work all the time, and I'm basically in the office from the time I wake up and then working until I go to sleep every day.
Toby, what do you think about this image building storyline about Elizabeth Holmes?
Well, I think like a lot of the stuff, you wonder what was the initial intention. Did she actually think like she had this invention that was really going to work? And when did she realize that it wasn't going to work? And when did the fraud come in? Because the reason why that would be interesting to know for me is because this whole image building thing, again, seems to kind of kick into a different gear. They tell that story about how she used to wear like Christmas sweaters. And then somebody mentioned who, the inspiration behind Steve Jobs wearing those ridiculous turtlenecks, and she had to go and get that designer stuff. You get the sense that she had a pretty strong idea about what she basically wanted to be like, but then the point at which she started to sort of make shit up to make her seem that way. It was that connected to the, device fraud, or was that kind of a separate thing that she was doing? Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but she also used people to create the image. She had to talk about the 4 bodyguards that she walked around with. And then, of course, she installs that number 2 at the company, Sunny Balwani, who's also secretly her boyfriend and a super dick to everyone.
And did he have any qualifications in the lab testing business?
He did not.
Or in pathology or anything like that?
Not to my knowledge.
So Sonny begins showing up to work every day at Theranos. Like Elizabeth, Sonny had his own kind of uniform, a white button-down shirt, jeans, and expensive loafers. He always smelled of cologne and became known for his flashy tastes.
And it's got 2 cars with vanity plates.
Douchey cars.
Sonny drove 2 cars, both with vanity plates. A black Lamborghini with license Vita Vici, as in Veni Vidi Vici, a reference to Julius Caesar's I came, I saw, I conquered. And a Porsche 911 with plates that paid homage to Karl Marx's anti-capitalist manifesto, Das Kapital. He was a very striking figure around the office, but his presence confused a lot of employees, like Michael Craig, a senior software engineer.
I always wondered why he was there. If she was actually held this vision of really impacting the world, I was like, why did she pick him then?
Now, one of the things I was really interested in this story, I'm super interested in like workplace stuff, especially that's a huge part of the national conversation right now. And they mention on the podcast about the company reviews on Glassdoor. So, of course, I got into this whole Glassdoor rabbit hole and started reading all these employee reviews. And it was like, position, scientist, rating, 1 star, reason, we're making stuff that doesn't work. My boss is a bully. I'm afraid to come to work in the morning. Like all that stuff is there on Glassdoor, like from 2014, 2015. It's all there.
Yeah.
You can read it. But we do hear, Kevin, one really tragic story about sort of the human cost of working in those conditions.
Oh, right.
I do think that people do tend to underestimate. We talk about workplace bullying and like difficult, but I think people really underestimate the impact it can have on a person's psyche when they are afraid at work every day or when they are just continuously beaten down at work every day. What did you think about that storyline about Ian, the man who died by suicide after working miserably for Elizabeth Holmes for so many years?
Oh, it was very sad. It was very sad for his wife. It was so articulate and brave in telling his story. That is a sign of a shitheel.
Yeah.
You want to be inspired by a boss, especially if this is somebody who's like, has this vision and is leading a company, it's just not right to be bullied and to be, put down. I mean, especially it's because some of it is because of the severe character flaws in leadership, but it's also because they realize that these emperors have no clothes. This product doesn't work. And the people who understand that and could say that need to be neutralized or they need to be contained. And so, he was, facing a deposition where, right, he either narked out the company or he perjured himself.
Right.
And
he needed to have a job. He was afraid of not having a job, which so many people I think can relate to.
Right. Didn't he have an illness too?
Yeah.
The detail that stuck out at me was that after he died, the company didn't send any flowers.
That's right.
I mean, been there 10 years.
Right.
The only correspondence that they received was essentially a threat letter.
Now, Toby, we heard the other story from another former employee. By the way, these people wrote the most awesome resignation letters. Who hasn't wanted to do that at some point in their lives? Who, a year or two after he left.
When I quit this show, it's going to be fucking epic.
Ran into Elizabeth Holmes at a drugstore of all places while he's picking up his Vicodin after being hit by a car on his bike, and he's battered and bruised and bloody.
You only needed one blood drop, too, at that Walgreens.
And she's in line behind him and, just starts talking to him as if they just saw each other the week before, being like, oh, you should really think about coming back to the company.
She probably said it like that, too.
What did you think about that story, Toby, and this sort of whole narrative about what it's like to work for a monster?
One of the things I thought about is that she behaves in a way that I think we're more used to hearing, asshole men behaving.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, one of the things that might have made her interesting, I guess, is that it's this sort of attractive, sort of all-American looking blonde woman who's just a complete freaking tyrant. There was a book called, is the CEO a sociopath or something like that? And the answer to that book was a hell of a lot of them are. And I think this is just another case, but a case writ large where her scam was that much better, that she was getting billions instead of millions.
Well, just one final thing I want to talk about that persona. In the podcast, we hear from her former employee and former Apple employee, Anna Ariola, who walked away from 15,000 Apple shares to go work for this company, which was all fake, about why it was she walked away from Apple to work at Theranos.
We had a great conversation. It sounded like an incredibly compelling mission that was basically really thinking about the betterment of humanity. She's incredibly passionate. She's very energetic, very expressive with her hands, and has a very unique, distinctive voice that you just kind of get drawn into what it is that she's conveying, and her conviction and her belief really shines through. She really did believe she was changing the world, as did we.
So, Laura, we hear there she's dynamic, Elizabeth Holmes. She's attractive. Mm-hmm. What role do you think Elizabeth Holmes' attractiveness plays in her ability to con so many smart people?
I hate to say this because you hate to admit something like this, but I think it played a role. I mean, you look at her, aside from her creepy voice thing that's going on, and she's attractive. She seems earnest when you look at her. She seems enthusiastic. She seems very excited about what she's doing. And there is something to be said for that when you're looking for a job and you're looking for something that you want to get behind. If you get behind somebody that presents like that, you feel like you're getting on board with something that's going to change the world, which is exactly how she was portraying herself. But she is cute. So I don't think that hurt the situation.
I don't think it hurt either. All right, well, let's do what we do. Let's tell our audience, should they check out The Dropout, this podcast from ABC Radio and ABC News Nightline? Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down so far for The Dropout?
I'm going to say thumbs up. I've seen some criticisms out there from people that say this is just so elementary, it's so basic, I can't believe it's not more detailed. I think those are people that have read the book and already done a lot of, research or, know about this case. I didn't really know that much about this case, so I find it really interesting. They've got really interesting people that they talked to that worked for her. So I would say take a listen.
What about you, Toby Ball? Thumbs up or thumbs down for The Dropout so far?
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically with all the points Laura just made. I think it's really good. I've really enjoyed it. I didn't know much about it, so like Laura said, if you know a ton about it already, you may think that there's nothing new there. But I think it's very interesting and well done, and I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of it.
Yeah, I'm also going to give it a thumbs up. I think it's just really beautifully put together. I'm enjoying the storytelling. One thing that's really hard to do that I think people underestimate how hard it is to do is to explain science or to explain a financial fraud or to explain a crime like this. It's very different than explaining a stabbing. It's just extremely different. And this podcast does a very efficient job saying, like, here's what the tech was supposed to do. Here's why that would matter to so many people. Here's why this was revolutionary. Here's why so many people were interested. Because you hear, like, who cares about your type of blood test or whatever? But then you look at the healthcare market and you realize that, like, tens of millions of people are getting blood tests every day and care a whole lot about what that technology looks like and feels like and what that experience is. And the podcast just did a really wonderful job explaining that, a really wonderful job explaining the stakes. The character development was efficient, great, well written. So I'm really enjoying it, and I do plan to continue listening after this thumbs up preview. What about you, Kevin?
I'm also a thumbs up. I like the way it's put together. It's some solid journalism, but it also is an interesting narrative. It's told well. I'm always interested in a true crime podcast that either talks about a different kind of crime or talks about it in a different way. White-collar crime, financial fraud. We don't get a lot of those kinds of podcasts. I mean, there was Ponzi Supernova, but, in this realm, it reminds me a little bit of The Social Network.
Yeah.
Let's tell the story about this brand name that you knew something went wrong. Like Laura, I didn't really, follow a lot of this in the news at the time, so it's a news story to me. I think she makes a very good villain. If you're wondering about, like, how did Elizabeth Holmes sort of become the person that she was?
So, Kevin,
yeah,
this podcast, like, really finished strong, right?
Yeah. I mean, we were still, like, in the middle of it, but yeah, definitely did. And remember, this was the basis for a really great adaptation starring Amanda Seyfried.
Mm-hmm.
And not the only piece of true crime media about the case, but definitely something that was great. And I also, we got to think about, this was one of the first, really successful times that one of the major TV networks or their news divisions, their television news divisions, put out a quality podcast.
That's right.
And so we've definitely been seeing more and more.
Before this,
of
it was
that.
all crap. No,
it was all crap.
No, just kidding. All right. Well, I really enjoyed both the podcast and the TV adaptation. So should we wrap it there?
Yeah, let's do that.
This show was recorded in Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement, where we also talk in a naturally deeper voice to command respect and convey gravitas in a male-dominated industry. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later.
Partners in Crime Media.